Tonight we're going somewhere that smells like beeswax candles and French perfume, and the very particular stink of ambition dressed up in silk. Picture a palace. Not just any palace. One of the largest complexes of buildings in Europe. 17 acres of sprawling rooms and corridors and gardens right in the heart of London, stretching along the north bank of the Thames like a stone animal that grew and couldn't stop. Now fill it with 2,000 people who all want something. Add the constant sound of heels on marble, of violins being tuned in adjacent rooms, of men in elaborate wigs whispering things that could get someone killed if overheard by the wrong ear. Add the smell of a river that doubles as a sewer running just outside the windows. Add beeswax from approximately 4,000 candles burning at all times because darkness is for poor people, and at Whitehall the candles never go out. Add the smell of powder and pomade and perfume layered thick enough to choke on because the people wearing it haven't bathed in a week, and they know it, and so do you. That's Whitehall Palace, the most important address in the Kingdom of England, seat of the monarchy, engine of empire, home to the court of Charles II by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, and the place where, if you play this game exactly right, you can hold more actual power than half the men in Parliament, without ever being given a single official title. That's the trick. That's the poison hidden in the gift. That's what we're going to live tonight. Because we're not going back to Whitehall as a tourist looking at the banqueting house ceiling or the formal gardens or the famous painted portraits. We're going back as a woman who has spent 2 years learning that a palace is just a very beautiful trap, and the silk around your wrists is still silk and it doesn't cut, but it binds just as well as rope. So, I make these stories, and I genuinely have no idea if any of you actually fall asleep to them, or if you're all just deeply strange people who find it soothing to listen to someone describe what it was like to be the unofficial companion of a 17th century monarch while navigating court politics on no sleep and an empty stomach. Either way, I'm not judging. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to silence. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a room where someone has been very careful not to make noise. For half a second, maybe less, you forget where you are. Then it comes back. Not slowly, the way it does in your dreams, all at once, like cold water. The smell hits first, because it always does. Beeswax, sweet and slightly smoky, from the candles that burned down to their stubs overnight. Your dresser forgot to snuff the one on the left again, and now there's a faint thread of charred wick smell that cuts through everything else. Under that, rose water, your own, on your skin and hair, applied last night before bed because you don't go to sleep in this palace the way other people go to sleep. You go to sleep prepared, in case someone knocks. Under that, the Thames. You'll never get used to the Thames. It comes through every window, every gap in the stone, every draught that moves through these rooms at night. The river is maybe 40 yards from where you're lying, and it smells of everything that London throws into it, which is everything London produces, which is considerable. And under all of that, underneath the wax and the roses and the river, there's the faintest trace of tobacco smoke embedded in the hangings round the bed. The man who was in this room 3 nights ago smokes a clay pipe. He's tried to stop. He won't. That's the smell of your life now. Welcome to Whitehall Palace, London, in the year of our Lord 1671. Your name is Eleanor Ashworth. You are 19 years old. Your father was Sir Thomas Ashworth of Ashworth Manor in Kent, who died 18 months ago owing more money than the manor was worth, which is why the manor is now someone else's problem, and you're lying in a room at Whitehall with beeswax in your nose and a king who knows your name. You have been here for 2 years and 4 months. Back home in Kent, when the letter came from your distant cousin Lady Fanshawe suggesting you might come to court, your mother wept with relief. Your older sister looked at you with something complicated in her face. Your younger brother didn't fully understand what was happening. London will make your fortune, your mother said. She wasn't wrong, she just didn't specify what kind of fortune, or what it would cost. The dresser, her name is Martha, she's 23 from somewhere in Dorset, and she's been with you for 14 months, is moving very quietly near the window. She knows better than to make noise before you've indicated you're awake. You've trained her well, or possibly. The palace has trained her, because at Whitehall, noise at the wrong moment can collapse an entire morning. You lie still for another moment. Feel the mattress under you. Goose down, properly aired, changed every 2 weeks. A luxury that still occasionally makes you hold your breath with gratitude when you remember what you slept on in Kent. Feel the weight of the coverlet, heavy and warm, embroidered at the edges with a pattern of leaves that catches the morning light. Feel the absence of anyone else in the bed. That is either a relief or a disappointment depending on the week. This week, it's a relief. Martha. She appears immediately, the way good servants do, as if she was standing just behind the word waiting for it. Good morning, my lady. You're not a lady, not legally, not officially. Martha calls you this because it would be deeply strange not to, given your rooms and your clothes and the particular quality of attention that surrounds you in this palace. But there's no document anywhere that grants you the title. There's no writ, no patent, no official recognition of any kind. You exist here by the grace of one man's ongoing interest, and that interest is not guaranteed to continue. You know this. You think about it every morning. You've learned to set it aside the way you set aside the sound of the river. Acknowledge it, note it, move on. Because if you let yourself actually sit with the fragility of your position, you'd never get out of bed. What time is it? Just past 7, my lady. It's clear this morning, cold, with some wind from the east. She pauses. There was a message from Lord Arlington's secretary, requesting your presence at 11 for a brief conversation. Your stomach does a small, careful thing, Lord Arlington, Secretary of State, the man who controls, among other things, the flow of information between this court and the French one, the man who has been trying to get you into a room alone for 3 weeks, not because of anything improper. Lord Arlington has impeccable taste in mistresses and his own wife, and he's not interested in you that way. He's interested in you as a conduit, as a channel, as someone who sits very close to the ear of the king. Everyone at Whitehall eventually wants a piece of that proximity. Tell his secretary I'll be indisposed until noon, you say. Martha nods. She's learned not to ask why. The correct answer is always, because I said so, and because buying yourself an hour of negotiating time before agreeing to any meeting is the most basic rule in this palace. Is there anything else, you ask? Lady Castlemaine is receiving visitors in her apartments this morning. The Duchess of Monmouth has already called. A pause, carefully neutral. And there's been some talk about last night. Of course there has. What kind of talk? About the king's preference for the dancing, who he partnered with. Twice. He partnered with you twice, you know this. You were there. And you know. The way this court works, which means by now that fact has been examined, analysed, argued over, and weaponised by at least 6 different factions, each of whom is trying to figure out what it means for their particular interest. Being noticed by Charles II is the most dangerous thing that can happen to you at Whitehall, and also the most necessary. That's the contradiction you live in, every single day. Help me dress, you say. Getting dressed in 1671 is not something you do. It's something that is done to you. It takes, on a good morning, 45 minutes. On a significant morning, one where you'll be seen by the right people, or the wrong ones, closer to 90. This is a significant morning. Martha begins with your hair, which was put up in rags last night and now needs to be carefully unbound, combed out, and arranged in the style that is currently fashionable at Whitehall. Loose curls at the sides, pinned up at the back, a few tendrils allowed to fall onto the neck. You sit at the dressing table and watch yourself in the mirror while Martha's hands work through your hair. You've learned to study your own face the way a general studies a map, looking for vulnerabilities, calculating angles, noting what can be used and what needs to be defended. Your face is the reason you're here. You know this. You've known it since you were 14, and men started looking at you differently. There is something uncomfortable about knowing that your entire position in the world rests on an accident of bone structure and complexion, and a particular way your eyes catch light. Something uncomfortable, and also, if you're honest, something pragmatic. You didn't choose the hand, but you have learned to play it. Martha pins the last curl. The blue today, you say, the one with the lace. The blue gown costs more than your father made in his last good year. It was a gift, technically. Everything in your wardrobe is technically a gift, which is one of the many ways. Your existence at Whitehall is technically everything and legally nothing. Martha helps you into the stays first. They're stiff with boning, and pulling them tight requires both her hands and your held breath. You've worn these long enough that the pressure no longer feels like constriction. Now it feels structural, like wearing armour, because that's what it is. The stomacher goes on next. Embroidered silk, stiffened, pinned to the stays so it sits flat and smooth across your front. Then the petticoats, 2 of them. The outer one quilted for warmth because these palace rooms are cold in February despite the fireplaces working constantly, and cold seeps up through the floors and through the walls and into your bones if you let it. Then the gown itself, blue-watered silk cut low at the bodice, in the fashion that Charles's court brought back from France. French fashion, French manners, French influence everywhere. The king spent 9 years in exile on the continent before the Restoration brought him home in 1660, and he came back Frenchified in a dozen ways he never fully shook. Martha buttons the back of the gown. Each button is small and covered in silk, and there are 23 of them, and each one takes a moment. 23 moments. 23 seconds each. That's approximately 8 minutes of standing very still while someone else closes you into yourself. You use the time the way you always do, thinking. Lord Arlington wants something. He's wanted it for 3 weeks. Each time you've delayed, he's grown incrementally more insistent, which tells you that whatever he wants, someone above him is pressing for it. That means it's either very important or very time-sensitive or both. You haven't agreed to meet him yet because you haven't decided what you want in exchange. That's how this works. Everything at Whitehall is exchange. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every favour has a price, and the price is always something else. And the person who names their price second usually gets the better deal. These are things your mother never taught you. These are things no one taught you. You learned them by watching, and by making expensive mistakes, and by lying awake at night cataloguing what you'd done wrong. Done, Martha says, giving the last button a small pat. You turn back to the mirror. The gown is good. The gown is very good. The blue makes your eyes do something complicated, and the cut makes your shoulders look like they belong to someone whose ancestors have been rich since before memory, which they haven't. But appearances in this palace matter more than almost anything. You take a breath. Time to go. Whitehall Palace is not a building. And when I say that, I need you to understand what I mean by it. When most people think of a palace, they picture one grand structure, a single impressive thing. Versailles, maybe, if you've seen pictures. One enormous house with wings. Whitehall is nothing like that. Whitehall is a city that calls itself a palace. It started as a London townhouse in the medieval period and grew and grew and grew. Every monarch adding buildings and courtyards and galleries and gardens, until by 1671 it covers something close to 23 acres and contains over 1,500 rooms, connected by a rabbit warren of corridors, galleries, back staircases, and covered walkways. You've been here for more than 2 years, and you still occasionally get lost. The oldest parts are Tudor, heavy stone, dark corridors, ceilings low enough that tall men duck instinctively. The newer parts are more open, airier, influenced by the Italian and French architecture the king and his court absorbed during exile. The banqueting house, standing separate from most of the complex, is classical and magnificent, designed by Inigo Jones 50 years ago, the ceiling painted by Rubens, which the king's father looked up at one final time before they led him out to the scaffold built outside, its windows. Yes, Charles II lives and works in a building from whose windows his father was executed. There are layers of history in these walls that would keep you awake if you let yourself think about them. You generally choose not to. Your apartments are in the southern portion of the main palace block, positioned with the kind of deliberate geography that everyone at Whitehall understands without ever saying. Close enough to the royal apartments to indicate favour, far enough that there's a corridor between you and total indiscretion. On the second floor, with windows facing east toward the gardens rather than west toward the river, because whoever assigned these rooms understood that you needed morning light and something pleasant to look at when you needed to think. Someone, possibly the king himself, thought about those details. That's the thing about Charles II that people outside this court don't fully understand. He's not the dissolute wastrel that his critics portray, all laughing and gambling and chasing women. He's sharp. He pays attention. He notices things. The king who gave you east-facing windows so you'd have morning light is the same king who can follow 3 conversations at once in a crowded room, who reads everything his ministers put in front of him rather than delegating comprehension, who has been managing the nearly impossible balancing act of ruling a fractious country with a hostile parliament for 11 years. He's also genuinely, deeply fond of dogs, occasionally disappears to his laboratory to conduct chemistry experiments, and has a sense of humour dry enough to start fires. He is not a simple man, which is part of what makes this complicated. You walk the corridor from your apartments toward the morning rooms where the court gathers before the day properly begins. Your heels on the stone floor make a sound, not loud, but present. You're wearing the shoes with the small heel, the fashionable ones, which means your walk has a particular quality to it that you've practiced until it became automatic. Not a sway exactly, more like a certainty. Like the ground is exactly where you expect it to be, every time, and you've never considered otherwise. Appearances again. Always appearances. The corridors of Whitehall in the morning smell like... God, how to describe this? There's wood smoke from the fireplaces that have been burning all night, trying and mostly failing to heat these rooms to anything approaching comfortable. There's the particular dry dustiness of old tapestries that line the walls, wool and silk that has been absorbing court life for generations. There's food somewhere nearby, bread being baked in the palace kitchens, the smell drifting up through the floors, yeasty and warm, and there are people. At 7:30 in the morning, Whitehall is already awake, servants moving in every direction carrying things, trays, linens, dispatches, bundles of firewood, grooms of various chambers doing the morning work of a 1,500-room palace, which is considerable, and sprinkled among them the courtiers, the people who live here, or half live here, the ones who maintain their presence at court because presence equals access, and access equals influence, and influence is the only currency that matters. They're dressed for morning appearances, not their full court finery. That comes later, for the afternoon drawing room, for the evening entertainments. But dressed deliberately, carefully, because you are always being seen here. Always. The corridor widens into a small anteroom near the top of the stairs. Two men are talking near the window, voices low. They glance up when you appear. One of them is Lord Rochester, John Wilmot, the poet. He's 23 or 24, you can never quite remember, and already his face has the carefully dishevelled look of someone who drank until very recently, and is quite pleased about it. He's brilliant and terrible, and writes verses about everyone at court that are accurate enough to be devastating. He's written one about you. You've read it. You chose to find it amusing rather than offensive, which you think was the right call, because Rochester respects people who laugh at themselves and eats alive the ones who don't. Miss Ashworth, he says. His voice has the particular quality of a man who has spent the night talking and is still warming up. You look as though you slept magnificently. I did, you say. 8 hours, solid, dreamed of nothing. He laughs. The man beside him, you don't immediately place him, minor Norfolk family, something about wool trading, looks politely confused. She's lying, Rochester tells him. Nobody here sleeps 8 hours. It's structurally impossible. The walls are too thin, and the gossip is too good. He turns back to you. Arlington's been looking for you. I know. I'll see him at noon. He wanted 11. I know that too. Rochester makes a small salute with his wineglass, which he is apparently carrying through the palace at 7:30 in the morning, without any sense that this requires explanation. Well played. He really means it. That's the thing about Rochester. Beneath the performance, he actually understands the game. He's too self-destructive to play it well himself, but he sees it clearly. He sees most things clearly. You nod and move on. The morning room is just ahead. You can hear voices already, the low murmur of a dozen conversations. You take a breath. You check that your posture is exactly what it should be. Straight without being stiff, relaxed without being loose. You soften the set of your jaw by a fraction. The expression you've cultivated for morning appearances is a specific thing. Warm, present, slightly amused, as if the world is consistently interesting rather than consistently terrifying. Then you open the door. The morning room at Whitehall in 1671 holds, on a typical morning, somewhere between 15 and 30 people. Today it's closer to 25. They're arranged in the instinctive social geometry of the English aristocracy in the Restoration period, clustered in groups of 3 to 5, positioned relative to the fireplace. Prime real estate, warm, comfortable, reserved by unspoken agreement for the most senior or most currently favoured present, and relative to the door the king typically uses when he joins the morning gathering. Everyone is positioned relative to the king's likely entrance. Even when the king isn't in the room, he's organising it. You take this in within the first 2 seconds. It's the kind of assessment that becomes automatic after long enough. Who's here? Who's missing? Who's talking to whom? And what does that configuration mean? Who has positioned themselves where and why? The Duchess of Monmouth, Anna Scott, young and pretty and married to the king's eldest illegitimate son, is near the fire with Lady Russell and Mrs. Stewart. Comfortable alliance, those 3. No particular threat to anything you're doing. Sir Thomas Clifford is in the corner with 2 men you don't recognise. Clifford is on the Cabal, one of the king's 5 most powerful ministers. He's Catholic, which he doesn't quite admit, and everybody knows. His presence here this early, talking to strangers, means something. You file it. And there, across the room, standing near the window with a cup of chocolate and an expression like a Renaissance painting of mild contempt, is Barbara Villiers. Barbara Palmer, Countess of Castlemaine, Baroness Nonsuch. The king's great love of the early years, his first major mistress, the woman who was considered the most powerful person in England for approximately a decade, who bore him 5 children he acknowledged, who spent the crown's money like it was paper and treated the Queen like a minor inconvenience. She's 30 now, still magnificent. Barbara will be magnificent when she's 70, it's in her bones. But the particular undisputed primacy she held in the early 1660s has been eroding for years. She knows it. You know it. Everyone in this room knows it. This is the part they don't write in the history books. The part where a woman who held everything watches it beginning to shift and has to smile and continue and find new strategies because the alternative is to fall. Barbara looks at you. You look at Barbara. In the first week you arrived at court, Barbara was kind to you in a way that was precisely calibrated to communicate. I am so secure in my position that I can afford to be generous to you. Come and look at me. I'll let you stand near me. You're not a threat. In the 2nd month she was less kind. In the 6th month she stopped speaking to you at a card party in public in front of approximately 40 witnesses. You responded by laughing at something the man next to you said, genuinely, not performed, because he'd said something funny, and by spending the next 3 weeks being so consistently warm and natural with everyone around her that the contrast became its own statement. That was 6 months ago. Now there's a kind of armed neutrality between you, not friendship, not open war, something that has its own rules, its own language, its own carefully maintained distance. Barbara raises her cup of chocolate toward you. A fraction of an inch. Acknowledgement. Formal. Correct. You raise yours in return. The conversation around you continues as if nothing happened. But everyone saw it, and everyone is filing it, the way you filed Clifford's corner meeting. This is the morning room. This is how it always begins. The chocolate is served by a young man in the king's livery who moves through the room with practised invisibility. The cups are porcelain, Chinese, brought over through the East India Company, and the chocolate inside is thick and slightly bitter and impossibly expensive. You cup your hands around the porcelain and feel the heat travel through your palms. In February, Whitehall is cold in the mornings in a way that has a particular quality. It's not the damp cold of the outdoors, it's a housed cold. Stone walls that absorb winter and release it slowly back into rooms through floors and through the gaps around windows. The fireplaces in the morning room are good ones, large and drawing well, but they're heating a room with 30-foot ceilings and windows that don't quite close flush, and the net effect is warmth from the waist up and cold ankles, and the perpetual sense that if you stepped just slightly to the left, out of the fireplace's direct radius, your breath would start to show. You stay where you are. You've learned which spots in every major room at Whitehall hold heat and which ones don't. Lady Frances Sedley appears at your elbow. Frances is 22, married to a man who is almost never in London, a poet's daughter with the particular confidence of someone who grew up being told she was clever and chose to believe it. You like Frances. Liking people at court is a calculated risk, but some risks are worth taking. Arlington has been telling everyone he needs to see you urgently, she murmurs, low enough that the words vanish into the general conversation noise. So I've heard. He talked to Buckingham last night about France. Buckingham, the second bee in the cabal. Charles's 5 key ministers named after their initials: Clifford, Arlington, Buckingham, Ashley, Lauderdale. Buckingham is the king's childhood friend and a political animal who has somehow survived everything. If Arlington was talking to Buckingham about France last night, this is bigger than a casual conversation. France. That means Louis XIV. That means the Treaty of Dover, the secret one, the one that almost no one in the government knows about, but that shapes every major decision Charles makes. The one where Charles, in exchange for money from Louis, agreed to convert to Catholicism and bring England into alignment with France's wars. You know about the treaty, not because you've seen it, you haven't, but because the king talks, not about state secrets specifically, not directly. But when you sit with someone regularly, in the relaxed hours before and after formal commitments, in the half-dark of private rooms, you begin to understand the shape of things from what's said around the edges. You know the shape of the Treaty of Dover. You also know that knowing it is itself dangerous. It's the kind of knowledge that could be used, that people would pay to obtain. That makes you valuable and also makes you a target. This is almost certainly what Arlington wants. Your hands are warm from the chocolate cup. You take a sip. The bitterness coats your tongue rich and dark, and you make the slight face you always make, and Frances laughs because she knows it. What do you think he wants, you ask? Frances considers it, the way she considers things. Head tilted slightly, eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance. He's been worried about the Dutch situation for months. If Charles gets drawn into another war, which Louis very much wants, the money situation gets difficult. Parliament won't fund a war they haven't approved. Arlington's trying to build arguments, trying to find levers. She looks at you. He's wondering what you know about the king's current thinking. You are thinking, I know exactly what the king's current thinking is, and the question is whether sharing any fragment of it with Arlington's office is in my interest or not, and what I get in exchange, and how I ensure it's something small enough that it can't come back on me. You say, I'll see him at noon. Frances nods. Careful, she says quietly, not like a warning, more like someone acknowledging that you already are. The king joins the morning room at 8:20. He enters through the secondary door on the east side, the one that connects to his dressing room, and the way the room rearranges itself when he enters is something you've watched dozens of times now, and it still fascinates you every time. It's not that anyone bows exactly, not formally, at a morning gathering like this, but something happens to posture all around the room, Shoulders come back, chins lift, conversations redirect, like flowers turning on a stem. Charles Stuart is 41 years old and 6 feet 2 inches tall, which makes him the tallest person in almost any room he enters, and means he can see over most of the people arranged between himself and wherever he wants to get to. He's dark, very dark for an English king, which has prompted a lot of speculation over the years that's mostly unfair to his mother. His face is not classically handsome, the nose is wrong, the jaw is heavy. But his eyes are extraordinary, large, dark, and possessed of a quality of attention that makes whoever he's looking at feel like the only person in the room. That attention is one of the most powerful things about him, and it is, very deliberately, a tool. He moves through the room, greeting people with the practiced ease of a man who's been performing kingship since he was 12 years old. A few words here, a joke there, the easy warmth that seems spontaneous and is in fact precisely managed. He reaches you in approximately 4 minutes. This is about average. Long enough that it isn't the first thing he does, which would be too obvious. Short enough that it's clearly intentional. Miss Ashworth. His voice, up close, is lower than it sounds across a room. There's a French edge to it still from the years abroad. Your Majesty. The curtsy is the appropriate depth for a private morning gathering. Not the deep formal one of a public audience, but not casual either. You look well, better than most of us this morning. He glances around the room with a comfortable survey of ownership. The musicians played rather late last night. I think Your Majesty's musicians are worth staying awake for. The corner of his mouth moves. Not quite a smile. Something more internal. Arlington is looking for you. So everyone keeps telling me. He asked me if I'd mentioned his request. You pause. This is interesting. Arlington asked the king directly about your availability for a meeting, which means Arlington is more pressed for this conversation than his secretary's measured tone suggested. The king mentioning it to you is a signal. He wants you to take the meeting, or at least he wants you to know it exists at his level. I've told his secretary I'll be available at noon, you say. Good. He says it with a finality that closes that particular subject. Then, will you ride this afternoon? The park, if the weather holds. He's asking. He's the King of England, and he's asking. This is one of the things about Charles that wrong-foots people who expect a tyrant. He asks in private genuinely. He learned something. From his father's fate, perhaps. If the weather holds, you agree. He moves on. 3 other conversations happen immediately, tugging him different directions. A lord from Yorkshire with a problem about land drainage. One of the minor secretaries with a paper that needs a decision. Rochester, materialising from somewhere with a story that makes the king laugh. Properly, from his chest. And for a moment he looks like a person instead of a king. You watch him for a moment, from across the room, and you think what you always think, which is, this is the most complicated thing I've ever done in my life, and I have no idea how it ends, and I chose it, and that is the important part. You chose it. You keep choosing it. Every morning when you walk into this room, you're choosing it again. That matters. You've decided it has to matter. The meeting with Lord Arlington happens at noon, as you specified, in one of the small private rooms off the matted gallery on the first floor. The room is about 12 feet square, stone floor, partially covered by a Turkish carpet in deep red and blue. One window, north-facing, letting in grey February light. A fireplace that's doing its best. 2 chairs positioned at an angle to each other, not facing directly, That would be too confrontational, but canted slightly, the way people arrange themselves when they want to signal openness. Arlington arrives precisely on time, which is his way. He's a precise man, controlled, the kind of man who considers lateness a form of aggression and punctuality, a statement about the quality of his attention. He's in his late 40s, with the patch over the bridge of his nose from the wound he got fighting for the Royalists back in the Civil War. He wears it deliberately. It's as much a part of his identity as the wig and the embroidered coat. He carried that wound into every political negotiation, every audience with the king, every meeting with foreign ministers. It's a scar that says, I was there. I gave something. Remember that. Miss Ashworth. He gestures to one of the chairs. You sit. You fold your hands in your lap. Your expression is the one you've calculated for negotiations. Attentive, warm, non-committal. He sits across from you and takes a moment before beginning. This is also characteristic. He doesn't rush into subjects. He likes to let silence do preliminary work. I won't waste your time, he says. You're a woman of considerable intelligence, and I've found that treating people of considerable intelligence as if they might be confused by directness rarely serves anyone well. This is already interesting. He's positioning this as respect. That's a choice. I appreciate that, you say. His Majesty is considering a military alliance. Not for public consumption yet, not for Parliament. You understand the distinction. You understand. Parliament didn't authorise the last Dutch war, financially or otherwise, and it was a disaster. Charles has learned to move around Parliament when possible. I'm listening, you say. The Dutch situation is, he pauses, finds a word, fluid. There are parties who believe that an alliance with France against the Dutch Republic would secure England's commercial interests significantly. There are other parties who believe the opposite. The king is hearing arguments from both directions. He looks at you steadily. I'm trying to understand which direction the wind is currently blowing. In the informal conversations, the private ones. There it is. He wants to know what Charles has said to you about the Dutch situation, what his private position is beneath the official neutrality. You take a breath. This is the moment. This is always the moment in 100 variations. Someone wanting a piece of what you know, offering something for it. Lord Arlington, you say, I think you're operating under a misapprehension about the nature of my position. He waits. People sometimes assume that being in close company with the king means functioning as a kind of listening post, a source of information about his private thoughts. You keep your voice pleasant without edges. That's a version of usefulness that I've never found particularly appealing. A beat. However, you continue, I'm a great believer in the importance of good relationships between the king's ministers. I think the work you and your colleagues do is often underappreciated, and I occasionally wonder whether there are ways in which I could be useful that are less extractive, more mutual. Arlington is quiet for a moment. Then, what kind of mutual? Here you are, the actual conversation underneath the stated one. There's a woman, you say, at the French court, Madame de la Vallière. This is Louise de la Vallière, who has been Louis XIV's mistress, but is losing ground to Madame de Montespan. She's been asking, through various channels, whether there are opportunities to correspond with someone at the English court, informally. Someone like you, someone like me. Arlington's expression doesn't change, but something in his eyes does, recalculates. She's been positioned very close to certain conversations about the treaty's implementation, you say. The timing of various commitments. If she were to correspond informally with someone here, you let the implication sit. This is true, actually. You've received 2 letters through a French intermediate over the past 6 weeks. You've read them. You've thought about them. You haven't responded yet. You've been waiting for the right moment to make them useful. I see, Arlington says. I thought you might find that interesting. Indeed. He's thinking now genuinely, the internal calculations visible only as a slight stillness about him. And in exchange for facilitating this correspondence, what would you consider fair? Access, you say, not information. I'm not asking you to tell me secrets. I'm asking to be in the room when certain conversations happen, formally rather than not. A pause. A recognized function would be useful. What you're asking for, in plain terms, is a position, not a title, not yet, but something that gives your presence at these negotiations a legitimate frame. Something that makes you harder to remove when the political winds shift. Arlington understands immediately. That's not entirely within my gift. No, but your recommendation would carry weight. He looks at you for a long moment. You meet his gaze and don't fill the silence. I'll think about it, he says. Of course. You stand, signalling that you're choosing the length of this meeting, not him. I'll look forward to our next conversation. You leave the matted gallery and walk carefully, steadily, down the corridor to the stairs, and only when you've turned the corner where no one can see you, do you let out the breath you've been holding. Your hands are shaking slightly. You press them flat against your skirts until they stop. That was... You don't know yet. That was either a first move in a negotiation that might actually give you something real, or it was a catastrophic mistake that will be reported to 4 different people before supper. The calculation runs again in your head. Arlington needs the French correspondence. The French correspondence is real and potentially valuable. You've just demonstrated that you have independent diplomatic connections, which makes you more valuable. The risk is that he reports the existence of those letters to the king, and the king takes it badly. You stop at a window overlooking the privy garden. The garden below is brown and frozen, the fountain in the centre silent and dry. The topiary cut back to bare shapes waiting for spring. A gardener is moving along one of the paths, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. He doesn't look up. Here is something that is difficult to explain about life at Whitehall. You are surrounded by people, at almost every waking moment, in a way that should never permit loneliness. 30 people in the morning room, 40 in the evening drawing room, the corridors full of servants and secretaries and minor officials and supplicants and lords and their wives' attendants, and underneath all of it a loneliness so specific and so complete that sometimes you think it might actually have physical weight. Because none of the 30 people in the morning room are there for you. You're an interesting variable in their calculations, and they're interesting variables in yours, and that is, the word is functional. Functional relationships. The machinery of court working. The only person at Whitehall whose interest in you is not primarily political is the king, and his interest is complicated and warm and real in its way, and also not something you can build a life on without additional support. So you build the additional support, you meet with Arlington, you cultivate Francis Sedley. You manage the armed neutrality with Barbara Villiers. You smile at the right people at card parties. And sometimes you stand at windows in corridors looking at frozen gardens and feel the weight of it. The gardener bends down, examines something near the path. His breath clouds out. The topiary trees stand bare and patient. You straighten your back. You adjust the set of your shoulders. You turn away from the window. There's an afternoon drawing room at 3. You need to change. The afternoon drawing room is one of the set-piece events of the court day. For those who don't know, the drawing room is a formal gathering held in the rooms adjacent to the royal bedchamber, where the king, or on some days the queen, receives visitors in a structured but theoretically casual social setting. Think of it as a very expensive, very crowded standing cocktail party, where everyone is dressed as if for a state occasion, and nobody's allowed to sit down unless they're invited to sit down. Today the king is receiving. The room is already full when you arrive. The heat from 30 bodies and 6 candelabra and a fireplace burning hard has brought the temperature in the room up to something approaching warm, a rare achievement in February Whitehall, but it also means the smell is considerable. Perfume and pomade and powder and the warm animal smell of people dressed in heavy formal wear with their hearts beating a little too fast. You find your position. There's geometry to the drawing room just as there is to the morning room, but the geometry is more formal, more loaded. Where you stand relative to the king's chair, where you stand relative to other people. Movement through the room sends signals. You take up a position near the third window to the right of the fireplace, which is close enough to observe without being imposingly central. From here you can see the room's main axis, the space between the door and the king's chair, and track who enters and who he notices and in what order. Barbara Villiers arrives 12 minutes after you. She positions herself at the left of the fireplace, the warmer spot, the more desirable one, and she does it with a confidence that makes it seem like the fireplace positioned itself around her, and not the other way around. She's wearing red. Of course she is. Barbara has always understood that red on her is a statement so obvious it becomes elegant. The king enters. The room performs its instinctive shift. Bows and curtsies, the rustle of silk and the creak of formal shoes. He makes a circuit of the room. This is the choreography of the drawing room. The king moves clockwise, greeting people, pausing when the conversation merits it, moving on. He spends approximately 4 minutes with Lord Clifford, 2 with a foreign minister whose name you don't catch, 30 seconds with Lady Russell. He reaches Barbara. They have a brief exchange, low-voiced, smiling, but the smiles are the careful ones. The ones that mean something is being negotiated even in greeting. He touches her hand briefly and moves on. He reaches you. Miss Ashworth. The same warmth as this morning, but different. He's in king mode now, the formal version of himself. I hope the morning was productive. Very, Your Majesty. Arlington found you? We had a very pleasant conversation. Something small crosses his face. Awareness, maybe, or amusement. Arlington's conversations are rarely pleasant. He was entirely civil. That generally means he wants something badly enough to make the effort. He's looking at you directly now, and when the full weight of his attention lands on you, even after 2 years, it does something to the air around you. There's a quality to being the subject of that gaze that's difficult to describe accurately without it sounding hyperbolic, and I'm going to try anyway. It's like being recognized, not as a role or a position or a piece in the game, but as a specific person. He looks at people and they feel seen. That's the trick. That's the particular magic of Charles II that kept people in his orbit against their better judgment for decades. He might find something, you say carefully, worth his effort. The king holds your gaze for a moment longer, then, walk with me tomorrow, 11 before the morning appointments. Of course, he moves on. Around you, the careful machinery of other people's interpretations has already begun. I want to tell you about the Queen, because you can't understand the position of a royal mistress without understanding the Queen, and the Queen's position is... It's something I think about a lot, actually. It's one of the stranger things, is this story. Catherine of Braganza arrived in England in 1662 as a 23-year-old Portuguese princess who spoke almost no English, had been raised in a convent in some respects of spirit, if not in formal fact, and had absolutely no preparation for what she was walking into. She was short, dark, lovely in a delicate way that the English court, accustomed to the tall blonde type, didn't quite know what to do with. She brought with her a substantial dowry, Bombay, Tangier, 2 million Portuguese crowns, and she was visibly kind, genuinely pious, and almost immediately overwhelmed. Charles, to his credit, was fond of her, in his complicated way. He was not faithful to her. He'd never promised to be, not really, but he wasn't cruel, which is more than you can say for many kings regarding their wives throughout history. When she had 3 miscarriages and began to look like she wouldn't be able to carry a child to term, he was genuinely sorry for her grief. He was gentle with her. He also made her officially acknowledge Barbara Villiers as a lady of the bedchamber, right at the beginning, in the first year of the marriage, made her accept his established mistress into her own household. She resisted, she wept, she refused. He waited. She accepted. You've heard this story from 4 different sources, each with different details, and the shape of it hasn't changed. A queen forced to accommodate. A wife required to absorb her own humiliation as a condition of her position. You have sat with this story many times. It makes you feel something complicated. Because here is the truth. Catherine of Braganza is not your enemy. She might even be, in some oblique parallel universe, your ally. 2 women navigating a position of dependency on the same man, both subject to the whims of his attention and his political needs, both lacking formal power in a world built entirely for the exercise of formal power by men. But the court doesn't allow for that kind of solidarity. You serve different interests. Your gain is, at some level, her loss. Not because you want it to be, because the structure of it works that way. You encounter the Queen at the drawing room that afternoon. She enters late with her ladies around her, and the room adjusts again. Catherine moves through formal spaces with the dignity that she has cultivated over 9 years of practice. Her English is much better now than it was when she arrived. Careful, precise, occasionally over-formal. She greets people with the correct warmth, the correct interest, the correct everything. She is very good at correct. When she reaches you, she pauses for exactly the right length of time. Miss Ashworth? Her voice is lightly accented, the Portuguese vowels smoothed but present. Your Majesty. The curtsy is the full formal one, always, with the Queen. The exact depth the protocol requires, never more, never less. Catherine looks at you for a moment. Her face, in these exchanges, gives nothing away that she doesn't choose to give. She's learned that particular skill too, the face that shows what it means to show. You are well? She asks. Very well, Your Majesty. Thank you for asking. The cold has been difficult, she says. I do not accustomed myself to English winters. A small contained thing passes over her face. Homesickness, maybe. The olive skin and dark eyes of Portugal looking out from behind a very correct English expression. I hope your Majesty finds some comforts, you say. I find many, she says, and she moves on. You stand very still for a moment after she's gone. The Queen of England just asked if you were well, and wished you comforts, and did all of it with more grace than most people in this room can manage in their best moments. Barbara Villiers, watching from the fireplace, catches your eye. For once something passes between you that isn't tactical, just the shared recognition of having witnessed something that both of you understand precisely. Then she looks away, and you look away, and the court continues around you. That evening there's a supper in the Privy Gallery, not a formal state dinner. Those are elaborate protocol-governed affairs that involve the Lord Steward and the yeomen of the guard and enough ceremony to make your teeth ache. This is one of the private suppers the king hosts several times a week. 30 or 40 people at a long table, good food, conversation allowed to wander wherever it wants to. The food is extraordinary. This is not something you take for granted. You grew up in a house where the cook was good but the budget was thin, and dinner was almost always some variation of meat and bread and whatever was in season from the kitchen garden. At Whitehall, every meal is a production. Tonight there's a soup, pale and rich, with cream and something herbed floating on the surface. There are 2 kinds of roasted birds, partridge, and something else you can't immediately identify, glazed with something dark and sweet-smelling. There are vegetables that have been coaxed into existing in February by the royal kitchen's considerable resources. There's a confection at the end that involves spun sugar in an architectural arrangement and tastes of orange, water and almond. You eat carefully. You always eat carefully at these dinners, because eating at a formal table is as much performance as consumption, and there are people who watch how you eat and draw conclusions from it. You're seated 6 places down from the king on the left side. Close enough for conversation if it's wanted. Far enough that it doesn't appear pointed. Across the table and 2 seats down is a man you've been aware of for several months but haven't directly engaged with. Sir George Etheridge, playwright, diplomat, wit. He's just returned from a posting somewhere, Ratisbon, you think, and he has the slightly dazed quality of someone readjusting to London from a post abroad. He catches you looking and raises his wine glass. You do the same. I've heard about you, he says across the table in a gap between other conversations. I've heard about you, you reply. He laughs. In what capacity? Playwright, mostly. She would if she could. The man of mode. He looks genuinely pleased. Writers always look pleased when someone has read them, even writers who pretend indifference to their audience. What did you think? Of Dorimant? You consider taking a sip of wine. The wine is from France. It always is. And it's very good, smooth and dark. I thought he was terrifying. He's meant to be charming. He's meant to be both. You look at him steadily. The charming ones always are. Etheridge is quiet for a moment, recalibrating, which is gratifying. Then, you're rather formidable, aren't you? I'm trying very hard not to be, you say pleasantly. But it's been a long day. He laughs again, genuinely, and turns to the person on his other side, and the conversation moves on. Down the table, the king is talking with Rochester and 2 other men about something that's making them all laugh. You can see the shape of it from here, the particular rhythm of a story being told well. Rochester is doing the telling. Charles is laughing. These are the moments, the unguarded ones, when the person underneath the king is most visible. The one who enjoys a good story, who finds genuinely funny things genuinely funny rather than performing amusement, who keeps around him people who will tell him the truth when they can, even when it's uncomfortable. He's not a simple man. Neither are his choices. Neither, you suppose, are you. After supper, the evening entertainment, there are musicians in the next room, a consort of strings playing the French music the king loves. Some people drift in and out listening. Some stay at the table talking and drinking. A card game materializes in a corner, and Rochester disappears into it with the practiced ease of someone who loses at cards on purpose, because the conversations at the card table are worth the money. You stay close to the edge of things. You're tired, really tired, the bone-deep kind that accumulates when you've been managing your public face all day and your private face has had approximately 0 time, and you're conserving yourself. Frances finds you near a window. Arlington was in very good spirits after your meeting, she says. Good. He's meeting with Buckingham tonight. You think about this. I was hoping he might. She looks at you with that sideways expression that means she's calculating something. What did you give him? I suggested a possibility, you say carefully. A channel that might be useful. The French letters? You go very still. I've been handling your correspondence for 3 months, she says, not unkindly. I know what comes through. You look at her. She looks back. There's a moment where the question hangs between you. The one about trust, the real one. Can you trust Frances Sedley? Can she trust you? The French letters are an opportunity, you say finally, if they're managed correctly. And if they're not, then they're a problem. You look out the window. The courtyard below is dark, lit by a few torches, and the wind is moving. I need to know which one they're going to be before I commit to anything. Frances nods slowly. What do you need from me? Find out who else Arlington spoke to today, besides Buckingham. I can do that. And Frances. You turn back to her. If this goes wrong, it won't, she says. And if it does, I wasn't in the room. You nod. This is friendship at Whitehall. Not warmth alone. Warmth plus clear limits. It's better than most people here manage. The king finds you at 10:30. Not formally. There's no public moment. No drawn attention to it. He simply appears near where you've been talking with 2 minor ladies about music, excuses them with a word, and stands beside you at the window while the music in the next room plays on. You spoke with Arlington, he says. I told you. He came to see me at 9, very pleased with himself. Charles looks out at the courtyard below. He tells me there's a potential French correspondence he'd like to explore through you. I told him I'd consider it. I know. A pause. What do you want in exchange? You look at him. In profile this close, he's more human than the formal portrait of him. The lines around his eyes, the way his jaw sits heavy when he's not performing. He looks like a tired man in his 40s, not a king. Something that makes me harder to remove, you say, because with Charles, in these moments, directness is the most useful register. He respects it more than most men. He's been lied to so comprehensively over so many years that honesty stands out. He looks at you then, really looks. You're not going anywhere, he says. Your Majesty. Eleanor? He says your name with a quality that makes the room contract slightly around you. I know what you're doing, building structures, making yourself useful from multiple angles. It's smart. It is, genuinely, very smart. A beat. But I want you to know, it's also not necessary. For how long, you ask quietly. He's quiet for a long moment. The music in the next room moves through a quiet passage. I can't promise you forever, he says. You know that, in the nature of things. I know? You do? So I build structures. Another pause, then, let me speak to Arlington about a formalised role, something with an actual function. I've been thinking about it already. You're careful not to show how much this matters. That would be, I'd appreciate that, you say. He nods. Then, come riding tomorrow, 11, as we said. Of course. He moves away, back into the room, the king version assembling itself again as he moves through people toward the next conversation. You turn back to the window. Outside, the courtyard is dark and cold. A guard paces his round, his boots making a slow, steady sound on the stone. The torch he carries throws orange light that moves with him and vanishes when he turns the corner. Your hands are pressed flat on the cold stone of the windowsill. The cold comes up, through your palms, through your wrists, settling into the bones. He said, I can't promise you forever. He said, you're not going anywhere. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and both of them are contingent, and you hold them both in your head the way you hold everything here, with the part of your mind that plans, that calculates, that never quite rests, and with the other part, the part that is 19 and from Kent and remembers being a girl in a garden before any of this. You feel for a moment something that doesn't have a category, something warm and frightening and complicated that you've decided not to name. Then you let it go. The guard comes back around the corner, his torch making its orange arc. Tomorrow, 11. Riding in the park. Time to sleep. Your apartments at night are very quiet. Martha has left everything laid out. The nightgown, the cap, the rags for your hair. The fire has been banked down to a slow burn, enough to take the edge off thee, cold without burning through the wood too fast. The candle on the left window ledge is properly snuffed this time. You go through the undressing sequence in reverse. The gown coming off, the stays loosening. You can finally breathe with your whole chest. God, the relief of it every single night. The petticoats folded. Your hair undone from its pins and combed out and wound into rags for tomorrow. Each thing put away properly. Each thing in its designated place. This is the part of the day where the performance stops, where it's just you, in a cold room in a stone palace, being exactly as tired as you actually are. You sit on the edge of the bed and take stock of the day. It's something you do every night, this accounting. What happened, what it meant, what tomorrow needs to be different. Arlington, the conversation, good probably, the French letters, disclosed but not surrendered, which is the right move. The king's response, better than you hoped, the mention of a formalised role, something to watch, something to follow up on carefully. Frances and her knowledge of the French letters, noted, not threatening, not yet. She could be an ally in this. She has been an ally in other things. Barbara, at the drawing room, the moment after the Queen passed, the thing that passed between you, the Queen, Catherine, the grace of her, the cost of it. You lie down. The mattress takes your weight and you feel the relief of it through your whole body. Your feet, which have been in those heels since 7 this morning, your lower back, your shoulders, your hands uncurl from their habitual careful curl and lie open on the coverlet. Outside, Whitehall continues. A late carriage somewhere. The Thames moving in the dark. Someone in the corridor beyond your door, moving quietly. A night servant probably. One of the dozens who work while the court sleeps. This palace never quite stops. You close your eyes. This is something worth pausing on. This specific moment. 1671, Whitehall, February. because what Eleanor Ashworth is navigating right now is something that had almost no language in her time to describe. The concept of a royal mistress as a political operative is something historians write about now, with 200 years of perspective and a comfortable distance. In the moment, it was something women lived without a framework for it, without any legal protection, any official standing, any recognised role. You couldn't sue for breach of contract. You couldn't claim a title your lover didn't choose to formally grant. You couldn't hold land in your own name without specific royal permission. You had no votes, no guild membership, no guild protection, no professional standing of any kind. What you had was proximity, and proximity in a court built around a single sovereign was everything. There had been English royal mistresses before. Everyone knew Rosamond Clifford, the fair Rosamond of Henry II, who was probably a reasonable historical person transformed by centuries of myth into something more picturesque. Catherine Swynford, who married John of Gaunt and whose bloodline consequently poured through multiple branches of English royalty. Anne Boleyn, who converted her position so effectively that she became the most dangerous royal mistress in history, and the most dangerous queen, and who still ended with her head on a block on the Tower Green. These women are warning and instruction both. Because the thing about proximity is that it exists entirely at the pleasure of the person whose proximity you occupy. There is no floor below you. The moment that one person's interest shifts, you fall. How far you fall depends on what you've built while standing close. Eleanor Ashworth is building. Every conversation, every negotiation, every carefully positioned alliance. Building a floor below the one that exists only because a king is interested in her. This is not a romantic story, it's a survival story dressed in silk. 3 weeks later, the walk in the park that the king promised happens twice more. The second time he brings Lord Arlington. This is significant. When the king brings his Secretary of State on what is ostensibly a casual morning ride, it means the casual morning ride is not casual. It means there are things to discuss in the particular kind of privacy that physical movement provides. Moving targets are harder to spy on than stationary ones, and the park in late February, cold and half empty, is about as private as anything gets at Whitehall. You ride between them, literally between them on the path, which is itself a statement, on a grey mare named Prosperity, who belongs to the royal stable and is given to you for morning rides with the kind of casual generosity that the king deploys when he wants to make a point about his interest without making a formal declaration. The park is beautiful in this light. The trees bare, the frost still on the ground. In the shadowed places the sky a bright cold blue. A group of deer in the distance, their breath clouding, watching the horses pass. Arlington tells me you've been in contact with Paris, the king says. He says it conversationally, as if commenting on the weather. Indirectly, you say. Through who? A woman called Marguerite de Villiers, no relation to Barbara. She's attached to the Duchess de Longueville's household. We were introduced by correspondence through a mutual acquaintance in Brussels about 8 months ago. You'd told Arlington this. You'd known Arlington would tell the king. That's why you told Arlington in precisely those terms. Enough information to make you seem open, not enough to remove your leverage. And what does Marguerite de Villiers have to say, the king asks. She's well positioned near La Vallière, you say carefully. Who is shifting in her position. There's apparently considerable momentum around Madame de Montespan, who is, you glance at Arlington, who nods fractionally. He knows. Who has a rather different perspective on certain agreements. The Treaty of Dover. You're circling it, talking about it without naming it. This is the language of this court. Different how? The king asks. La Vallière was a restraining influence, apparently. Montespan is less interested in restraint. Charles is quiet for a moment, watching the deer in the distance. And what does your correspondent want from this connection? Information about the English position, specifically around timing of certain commitments, which you haven't provided, which I haven't provided. He looks at you. In the park light, on horseback, he looks different than he does in the palace. More like a man, less constructed by formal setting. His coat is dark blue, simply cut, and the horse under him moves easily under his hands. You've built something interesting, he says. I'm trying. A pause. The horses move at a steady walk. The frost crunches lightly under the hooves. Arlington wants to use the connection, the king says. Feed specific information through it. Shaped information. Things we want Paris to believe about our timeline. This is disinformation. Diplomatic manipulation through what appears to be a personal correspondence. That's possible, you say. If the correspondence is maintained carefully, it would require you to become more actively involved, not just a channel, a participant. You think about this. Really think, not the automatic calculating you do automatically, but actual careful thought. Because this is a different level. This is operational. This makes you not just close to the king's interest, but part of them. Useful in a way that would be difficult to remove. It also makes you a potential liability if it goes wrong. I'd want something clear, you say, about my position. Define clear, Arlington says from your other side. He's been mostly quiet, listening. Formal, something documented. Not in formal favour, something with a structure. The king looks at Arlington. Arlington looks at the king. Something passes between them, a conversation that happens above and around you that you're not party to. Then the king, we'll work something out. You know better than to push. Thank you, you say. The horses walk on. The deer watch from the edge of the trees and don't run. Spring comes slowly to Whitehall. It comes grudgingly, through weeks of cold rain that turns the paths in the Privy Garden to mud and keeps the more delicate courtiers indoors. It comes through muddy boots left at the door and the smell of wet wool and the particular misery of a stone building that soaks up rain through every crack and holds it. And then one morning in April you wake up and the smell coming through the window isn't Thames rot and coal smoke. It's green, something green and alive. You lie still for a moment and smell it. Properly smell it, the way you've learned to, not as background but as the specific thing it is. Damp earth, new growth, the faint sweetness of whatever is blooming in the garden 2 floors below. Spring. Martha comes in and sees your face and smiles, because she's from the country too. And she understands. Outside in the Privy Garden, the first colour is appearing in the beds. Crocus, mostly. Purple and yellow and white against the black soil. The fountain had been restarted and you can hear it faintly. The splash and run of water from the window. The court becomes different in spring. Not kinder exactly, the court is never kind, but lighter. The entertainments shift outdoors, picnics in the park, which are elaborate affairs involving 40 people, and a considerable quantity of wine and the king's dogs running underfoot, concerts in the gardens, boat trips on the Thames in the royal barges, which are gilded and ridiculous and beautiful. Your position by April has changed in several ways. Arlington has given you a formal appointment. It's not a household office, not a lady of the bedchamber, which would require a formal title and a complex procedure, but a keeper of correspondence position, quietly established, with access to certain diplomatic communications and a small annuity attached. It's been done through channels that make it look like a household function. It barely shows on the official rolls, but it's there, documented, real. When the court moves to Windsor in May, as it does every summer, the annual migration from Whitehall to the more comfortable castle, you go as part of the official household, not as an informal attachment to the king's personal time. That's a flaw, a small one, but a flaw. Windsor in May smells of grass and horse, and the warm stone of the castle heating in the first real sun of the year. The castle sits on a hill above the Thames, looking out over the great park. 3,000 acres of managed woodland and formal plantings and deer, and from the terrace at the top of the round tower, a view that takes your breath away every single time you see it. You're standing on that terrace on a clear afternoon in late May, and you can see everything. The Thames curling below, silver grey, moving toward London. The long walk stretching south through the park, its avenue of elm trees in full leaf, a green corridor of impossible length. The town of Windsor clustered at the castle's foot. In the far distance, on a clear day like this one, you can just see the haze of London, the city you've been living in for 2 years, the city that ate you and changed you and made you into something different from what you were. From up here it looks small. From up here, Whitehall is just a smudge in the haze. This is what perspective does. It doesn't make things less real. It puts them in scale. The negotiations, the corridors, the careful positioning, the 1,000 small calculations that make up a day at court. From up here they're still important. But they're not the whole of everything. They're part of something larger. England, the Thames, 3,000 acres of park where the king hunts deer. You're a very small part of this. And also, and this is the thought you come back to on this terrace, on this May afternoon, with the wind coming warm from the south and the elm leaves moving. Also, not nothing at all. There is something I should tell you about the women who came before, because Eleanor Ashworth is not the first, and she won't be the last. And the history of English royal mistresses is a history that runs from the medieval period all the way forward, and each of them navigated a version of the same impossible situation. Barbara Villiers, who still exists in Eleanor's life as that armed neutrality, that careful watching, is making different calculations now. Barbara has children, 5 acknowledged royal children, and the legal status those children provide is something Eleanor doesn't have. The Duchess of Cleveland, that's Barbara's formal title now, granted in 1670, has an income, properties, legal standing. Barbara's path was different. Her position was earlier, when the king was younger and more dependent on her, when she could demand things in ways that the more settled middle period of a reign doesn't permit. There is also, and this matters, Nell Gwynn. Nell is not at Whitehall in 1671. She's at her house in Pall Mall, and the king sees her in a different register entirely. The warm, uncomplicated one that you sometimes catch a glimpse of in his most relaxed moments. Nell Gwynn, actress, daughter of a brothel keeper, the most popular woman in London, who wears her position with such cheerful straightforwardness that the English public who hate Catholic mistresses love her. "I am the Protestant whore," she said to a crowd that was jeering at her carriage, thinking it was the Duchess of Portsmouth's. They laughed and cheered. Nell doesn't play the political game at all. She doesn't want to. She wants the house and the money and the king's affection and nothing more complicated. In some ways, Elena thinks, that's the bravest choice of all. And then there's Louise de Querouaille, the Duchess of Portsmouth, who hasn't quite arrived yet in 1671. She's coming, French and Catholic and politically connected and deeply alarming to half the court, but who Eleanor can feel gathering on the horizon like weather. Each of these women navigating the same fundamental condition: power that exists without legal basis, influence without title, a life built on proximity to one man's ongoing interest. Each of them finding different answers to the same question. How do you make something real out of something that the law says doesn't exist? The summer passes. The court at Windsor, warm evenings and long afternoons and the slower pace of the country season. Hunting parties in the great park, the king disappearing for hours on horseback and returning happy in the specific way that physical exertion makes him happy. The diplomatic correspondence through Marguerite de Villiers continues. You've written 3 letters, carefully, with Arlington's office reviewing each one before it goes. The information in them is calibrated, true enough to maintain credibility, shaped enough to serve English interests. You have no idea if it's working. You won't know for months, possibly years. This is what diplomatic work feels like from the inside. You send things out and wait and try to read the response and send something back. It's like putting messages in bottles and watching for answers on the tide. Your French has improved considerably. It was already good. You'd had lessons from 14. One of the things your father spent money on in the belief that a well-born girl needed languages, but now it's working French, functional in nuance and implication. You've been reading French political correspondence for 6 months, learning the particular conventions of it, the way meanings slide sideways in that court the way they do in this one. In September, Arlington tells you that a piece of information you passed through the Villiers correspondence, something about the timing of a naval commission, appears to have influenced a French decision in a way that was useful to England. He tells you this with the measured satisfaction of a man who doesn't often admit that other people's work is effective. You have a natural aptitude for this, he says. For what exactly? For understanding what people want to hear, and how to tell it to them in a way that seems like information. He looks at you with something that might, in a different register, be admiration. That's rarer than you'd think. You consider whether to thank him and decide against it. I'll keep at it, you say. He nods. Yes, I think you will. Autumn at Whitehall has a particular colour. The light changes first, the summer's clear, direct light giving way to something lower and more golden, hitting the stone of the palace buildings at a different angle and making everything look briefly, convincingly beautiful before the cold sets back in. The trees in the Privy Garden turn, yellow and amber and a red so deep it's almost brown, and then the wind comes and they let go, and the gardeners sweep them up, and by November the garden is bare again. The court comes back from Windsor. The pace picks up. Parliament is in session. There are ministers and ambassadors and petitioners filling the corridors of Whitehall with the particular urgency of things that need deciding. You've been here for nearly 3 years now. You know things about this palace and this court that it took you a long time to learn. You know which floorboards creak in which corridor and which windows stick and which doors can be locked from inside. You know which servants are loyal to whom. You know which courtiers drink too much and which ones lie, and which ones are, beneath the performance, actually what they seem. You know that Lord Clifford has gout and takes it personally when God doesn't cure it. That Lady Russell is kinder than she appears in public. That Rochester's destructiveness is grief aimed inward, which doesn't excuse it but explains it. That the king is afraid, in a way he'll never say directly, of being deposed. That the thing he fears most about Parliament is not their financial control, but the way they remind him, by their very existence, that his father's fate is one bad decision away from being his own. You know these things. You've learned them the way you learn a language, slowly, through immersion, through error and correction, until the grammar of it becomes something you feel rather than translate. You're becoming, as you once thought from a terrace in Windsor, something different from what you were. Not a Kent girl anymore, not quite a court woman either. Something in between, something still forming. One evening in October, Barbara Villiers comes to your rooms. She sends no message first. She simply appears at your door at 7, accompanied only by her own maid, and your maid lets her in because Barbara has the quality of a force of nature, and you don't turn away forces of nature at the door. You're at your writing table when she enters, working on a correspondence. You rise. Lady Castlemaine. The formal title. Correct distance. Don't, she says. Not tonight. She looks. You see this immediately and carefully. Tired. Genuinely tired. Not performed weariness, but the real kind that sits in the skin. She's been to Paris in September, a trip that was ostensibly social and was almost certainly political, and something about it has left its mark. She sits in the chair across from your desk without being invited. Barbara Villiers doesn't wait for invitations. She never has. You sit back down, you fold your hands, you wait. Louise de Carouaille is coming, Barbara says. I've heard. She'll be here before Christmas. A pause. The king is interested. Yes. Barbara looks at you across the desk. In the candlelight her face is complicated. Magnificent still, because Barbara will be magnificent even in ash. But something in it that you've never quite seen there before. Something like honesty, maybe. She's French, Barbara says, which means she's Lewis's creature. Almost certainly. She'll use the position for French interests. Every piece of intelligence, every conversation she has with the king, it goes back to Versailles. I know. You're Arlington's creature, Barbara says. It's not an accusation, it's a categorization, offered with a certain respect for the clarity of it. More or less, you agree. Then we have a mutual interest. She says it simply. Not friendship. I'm not offering friendship. I know what I think of you, and I imagine you know what you think of me, and let's not pretend otherwise. Agreed. But interests overlap. Louise's arrival creates a different kind of competition than the kind we've been having. The French interests are not English interests, and there are people in this palace. She means the king, you both know she means the king, who occasionally need reminding of that. You look at her for a long moment. Barbara Villiers, who has spent 10 years being the most powerful woman at this court, who has the king's children and the duchess's title and properties enough to never be vulnerable, is sitting in your chair in your room at 7 in the evening asking you to help her. It's remarkable, actually. What are you proposing, you ask? Nothing formal, she says immediately. Nothing that commits either of us to anything. Just information shared, occasionally when it's relevant. What kind of information? Things about Louise's connections in Paris. Things you'll know through Arlington that I won't know through my channels. In exchange, she pauses, and something in her expression does a careful thing. I can tell you things about Charles that you don't know yet, that take years to understand. The knowledge she's offering is the knowledge of a decade, the map of a person that only comes from years of proximity. You think about it. Occasionally, you say, when it's relevant, yes, nothing formal. No, you nod. All right. Barbara stands. She smooths her skirt. The gesture is habitual, automatic, the kind of small physical movement you make after sitting when the stays have been pressing all day. For a moment you're both just two women in a room, tired from being in it all day. She's going to be difficult, Barbara says. Louise. Most interesting people are. Something crosses Barbara's face that might, in a different life, in a different context, be the beginning of amusement. Good night, she says. Good night, Lady Castlemaine. And she goes. You sit for a long time after she leaves. Outside, the October wind is up and you can hear it moving through the palace, the high whistle of it through gaps in stone, the rattle of window frames, the sigh of it through the chimneys. The candle on your desk flickers and steadies. 3 years ago you were in Kent, in a house that was losing money and a family that was losing hope, and your mother was telling you about a letter from a cousin at court and the possibility it might represent. You had no idea. How could you have? You walk to the window. The privy garden is dark below. Only the faint gleam of the fountain in the moonlight. The trees are bare now. The last of the leaves gone. Somewhere in Versailles, Louise de Kerweiler is packing her things. Planning her introduction to an English court she's been trained to influence. Carrying French interest the way Eleanor carries English ones, the way Barbara carries her own, the way every woman in this game carries something that isn't quite hers, but has become inextricably part of her. This is what power without a title looks like. Not a throne, not a crown, not even a document always that says, you are this with these rights. It's a web of relationships carefully built, some of them tactical and some of them genuine and some of them both. It's information held and deployed at the right moment. It's the face you've practiced and the letters you write in French and the position near enough to the king that his priorities have become, in some functional way, your priorities. It's fragile. It's real. It's yours. For now. The fountain catches the moon and gives it back. November passes in a blur of negotiations and letters, and the particular tense energy of a court that knows a change is coming. Louise de Kerweiler arrives in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. She is 22, French, beautiful in the way that the French court produces beautiful women, the result of extreme attention given to appearance from a very young age, the art applied so consistently it starts to look like nature, dark-eyed, dark-haired, possessed of a stillness that looks like composure and probably is, by now, whatever it was originally. You are introduced at a supper. She's placed 3 seats down. You exchange the correct courtesies and watch each other with the careful attention of people who already know they are relevant to each other. Her English is careful, limited. She arrived knowing it imperfectly and has improved quickly, which tells you something about her intelligence. She navigates the conversation with the instincts of someone who's been trained for exactly this situation. She catches you watching and smiles. You smile back. The king is attentive to her in the way he's attentive to interesting things. Focused, warm, giving her the full weight of that attention. Across the table, Barbara, seated near the end, maintains a face that gives nothing away. The court watches all of this with the collective focus of an organism that lives on exactly this kind of development. You eat your supper and drink your wine and think, here we go, here is the next thing. After supper, Louise finds you near the fire. Miss Ashworth. Her accent is rich and French around your English name. I have heard you are someone I should know. I've heard the same about you, you say. She smiles. A real one, or at least a very well-constructed one. I think we will be. Neighbours here. I think so. It would be pleasant to have someone to speak French with, she says, when one is newly arrived. A slight gesture encompassing the room, the palace, the foreign country she's in. It can be isolating. I understand that feeling well, you say. She looks at you with those dark eyes, and she's reading you the same way you're reading her. The diplomatic look, the professional assessment underneath the social warmth. I hope we can be friends, she says. I would like that, you say. Both of you mean, I will watch you carefully and find what I can use and protect what I have to protect. Both of you mean it warmly, in the way that this court uses warmth, which is functionally and sincerely both at once. This is going to be interesting. Christmas at Whitehall. The palace is transformed. Holly and ivy and laurel everywhere. The smell of it green and sharp in every corridor. Candles multiplied. The palace burning bright against the December dark. Music almost constantly. The king loves music at Christmas, and the court's musicians work long days and longer evenings. There are 12 days of festivities, formal and informal, woven together. Masks in the banqueting house. Plays. A company comes from the Duke's Theatre and performs in one of the large halls, the court watching from tiered benches while the actors do their thing on a makeshift stage. Card parties that go until 3 in the morning. The King's birthday, celebrated in February but sometimes pre-observed at Christmas for reasons of seasonal convenience. You move through all of it. At the masque, you wear gold mask over your eyes and a gown the colour of deep water, and you dance 2 of the formal dances and watch Louise de Querouaille dance 3 and watch the King watch Louise and calculate. At the play, it's one of Etheridge's actually, which means Etheridge is there in a corner looking at once pleased and critical. You sit 3 seats from the King and listen to lines about love and manipulation and the social performance of desire and think, yes, that's accurate. At the card party 2 nights before Christmas, you win back almost everything you've lost over the previous 6 months at cards, because you've been losing deliberately and saving the winning for a moment when it would be noticed by the right people. Rochester sees what you're doing and raises his glass across the table, silently in admiration. You raise yours back. On Christmas Day itself, the formal service in the Chapel Royal, and afterward the formal dinner, and afterward the afternoon chaos of a palace full of people who have been drinking since noon and consider the day's celebrations fully earned. You find yourself on a window seat in one of the smaller galleries, just for a moment, alone. The corridor outside is quiet. Everyone is in the main rooms, the dining rooms, the music room. Through the window, the privy garden, tonight lit by lanterns hung from the bare tree branches, reflecting in the fountain. The snow that fell last week is still on the ground, hardened now. The shapes of the topiary visible underneath white rounded hats. It's beautiful. Whitehall at Christmas in the lantern light is beautiful. You've been here 3 years and 3 months. You arrived in September of 1668 with a letter from your cousin and nothing else. You've learned the language of this place so completely that sometimes you forget there was a time you didn't speak it. In Kent, if you close your eyes, you can still see the house. The wisteria on the south wall in summer. The kitchen garden where you used to sit when your father was in one of his moods, and the house felt too small to hold everyone's feeling. The view across the fields, which had a kind of plainness that felt honest, just fields and sky and the distant line of the coast. None of that is yours anymore. The house is sold. Your mother is in Bath, in a small house funded partly by you and partly by your older sister's husband. Your brother is apprenticed to a solicitor in Maidstone. What's yours now is this. These rooms, this position, this web of relationships carefully built and carefully maintained. It's not what you imagined at 14 when you imagined a future. It's stranger, more complicated, more interesting, and more yours in a real sense than anything else has been. You sit by the window for 5 more minutes. The lanterns in the garden move slightly in the wind. The snow holds its shapes. Then you stand. You smooth your gown. You adjust your expression back to the warm, present, slightly amused version. Time to go back in. January comes. The new year brings its particular Whitehall flavour. Everyone slightly exhausted from the 12 days of celebration, the pace resuming, Parliament reconvening, the machinery of the state grinding back into motion after its Christmas rest. Louise is settling in. She moves through the court with a confidence that is built quickly. She's a fast learner, faster than you were, partly because she arrived with better preparation and partly because she has Versailles behind her in a way that gives her a particular backbone. When you have the most powerful monarch in Europe watching your progress and expecting results, you develop a certain urgency. You observe her. You also carefully help her. Small things, navigating certain protocol questions, explaining the particular etiquette of Whitehall mornings that differs from Versailles. You do this because being helpful to Louise costs you almost nothing at this stage, and the credit of having been useful is not nothing. Barbara's occasional intelligence reaches you through oblique channels. A word left in conversation, a note sent through a maid. It's about the Paris connections mostly. Arlington's office receives it and files it with the rest. The correspondence with Marguerite de Villiers continues. She's closer to Montespan now, La Vallière having retreated, her reign effectively over. And Montespan is interested in maintaining the English correspondence because she's interested in everything that gives her information. What Montespan doesn't know is that the information in the correspondence has been shaped. This is the game. Everyone's shaping. Everyone's filtering. The question is who's shaping whom? In February, on a cold Tuesday morning with snow coming down outside the windows, Arlington calls you to his office. It's a proper office this time. The Secretary of State's formal rooms where the actual business happens. Clerks outside with their papers. The organised bureaucratic hum of government. He meets you standing, which is slightly unusual. His face has the particular careful arrangement it gets when something significant is about to be said. The correspondence through Villiers, he begins. Yes. There's a problem. Your stomach does the small, careful thing. What kind? The French court has become aware that the channel may have been shaped. Not entirely. But there are indications that Montespan's office is questioning the reliability of some of what's come through. You let this settle. The shaped information has been found out, or at least suspected. How confident are they? Uncertain. It's suspicion, not certainty. But Villiers has become cautious. Her last letter was extremely careful. She's protecting herself, you say? Yes. Can the channel be maintained through that kind of caution, Arlington considers? With difficulty and reduced usefulness, you think. The channel may be compromised but not dead. That means there's still a use, possibly. but it requires different handling. Can we use the suspicion, you ask? He looks at you. If Montespan suspects the channel, you say carefully, she'll be watching it for proof. That means she's paying attention to it. If we send something through now that appears authentic, genuinely valuable to French interests, it might actually rehabilitate the channel's credibility. Arlington is quiet for a moment. That would require giving them something real. Something real, but something we control the consequences of. He looks at you for a long moment. You've thought about this, he says. I've been thinking about it since the channel opened, you say. The moment it stops being useful in the original direction, it needs a secondary function. Which is? French confidence in information that we want them to be confident in, for specific reasons. This is a more sophisticated piece of work than anything you've done yet. It means deliberately crafting information that is true, but selectively true, in a way that shapes French behaviour rather than just English cover. Arlington nods slowly. We'd need to decide what we want them to believe. Yes, you pause. I'd want to know what we're doing before I write anything. Of course. He makes a small note in the margin of a paper on his desk. I'll arrange a meeting with Buckingham. His office has the specific requirements. All right. He looks up from the paper. This is good thinking, he says, with the same measured tone he always uses. I want you to know that. You nod. You're learning by now not to make too much of praise in this office, but you take it in, set it somewhere useful. Thank you, you say. The spring of 1672 brings the Third Anglo-Dutch War. Parliament didn't authorise it. The king did it anyway, with French money and a declaration of indulgence that was meant to ease Catholic worship in England and which Parliament would overturn within a year. The war is going badly almost immediately. The English fleet under the Duke of York fights the Dutch at Solebay in June, and the result is complicated. Not a victory. Ships burning. Men drowning. The newspapers printing everything they can get and the coffee houses full of argument. At Whitehall, the war changes the atmosphere. The corridors are tense in a different way. Not the social tension of competing interests, but the real tension of a country doing something costly and uncertain. Ministers arrive and depart at unusual hours. The king's face in the morning has a quality it doesn't usually have, something compressed, the calculations showing through the ease. You're useful in these months in ways you hadn't anticipated. The French correspondence, rehabilitated through the careful operation you and Arlington designed in February, becomes a more active channel. Marguerite de Villiers, her confidence in the connection restored, passes information from Montespan's circle that gives Arlington's office a view into French thinking about the war's progress. Some of it turns out to be very useful. Your role in all of this is unusual. You're not a diplomat. You have no official status in any of the formal machinery, but you're the person the channel runs through, and that means you're in rooms you wouldn't otherwise be in, reading things you wouldn't otherwise read. It's interesting. It's genuinely interesting, not just strategically. The actual substance of it, the way diplomatic thinking works, the gap between what countries say publicly and what they're doing privately, the way great events look from inside the rooms where the decisions are made. You've started reading more broadly. History, mostly. Arlington's library has a considerable collection, and he's offered access to it. The wars of the previous century, the correspondence of Elizabeth's court, which is its own kind of education in how women navigate power without formal structures. Elizabeth managed it. Different context, different power. Elizabeth was queen. which is rather different from Royal Mistress. But some of the shape of it is legible. The improvisation, the constant recalibration, the way you build something real out of materials the system didn't intend to offer you. Let me slow down for a moment. Because I want to tell you something about the smell of Whitehall in summer. By July, when the court is usually at Windsor or Hampton Court, but the war has kept many of the ministers in London, Whitehall has a smell that is specific to the season and to the building, and I want you to understand what I mean when I say it. The Thames in summer is something else. When you've experienced it once, you understand why the court traditionally leaves for Windsor. The tidal river, carrying everything London throws into it, warming in the summer heat, produces a smell that travels, that enters through windows, that sits in the air of rooms, even when the windows are closed. This is 1672, 60 years before the great stink that will finally force Parliament to take the sewage situation seriously. But the situation is already notable. Already something that people who live near the river build their routines around. The palace absorbs and holds smells, old wood and stone and tapestry absorbing decades of life, candle smoke and cooking, and the particular smell of large groups of humans living in close proximity without the benefit of modern plumbing. The flowers in the gardens help. The kitchen gardens produce lavender and rosemary and other aromatic things that people carry in small sachets and leave in rooms to mitigate. Beeswax on every surface, that warm, sweet smell. But the river is always there, under everything, the actual ground note of this city. In summer, Eleanor's rooms smell of Thames and lavender and the cedar lining of her clothes, chest and the particular ink she uses for the French correspondence, which has a sharper smell than the domestic English variety. She's learned to associate that ink smell with the particular focused state she goes into when writing the letters, careful and precise, and thinking several moves ahead. This is what her work feels like in the physical sense. Her hands in summer are warm, the stiffness gone that winter puts in her fingers. She can write faster, think faster, the body running better in warmth. She writes at the table by the east window in the morning light, and the scratch of the quill on the paper is the sound of the work getting done. Summer passes, autumn, another winter. The war ends. Not well, not cleanly. Parliament forcing Charles to negotiate the Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which leaves England with very little and France very much. The aftermath is ugly, politically. Parliament is furious. Charles retreats into the management of it. The endless, careful navigation of a monarch who needs Parliament's money but despises their interference. Through all of this, Eleanor's position has continued to build. The French correspondence has run for 3 years now. It's weathered the war, the treaty, the shift from La Vallière to Montespan, 2 attempts by competing interests to access it or undermine it. It's still running, still useful. The annuity Arlington established has been quietly increased twice. The Keeper of Correspondence position has been not formalised further exactly, but embedded. There are now 2 clerks whose work intersect with hers in an official capacity. She has access to certain communications that didn't used to pass across her desk. Louise de Kerouaille has been made Duchess of Portsmouth in August 1673, the formal recognition that Eleanor doesn't have. Louise now has the title and the income and the legal standing that the position provides. Eleanor is still officially nothing. But Arlington's office knows what she does. Buckingham's people know. The man who handles the actual correspondence with Paris knows. The 2 clerks know. In this world, in this court, in this particular machinery of government, that's not nothing. It's still not the same as a title, or a property, or something that survives the king's death. She knows this. She keeps building. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in January of 1674, when the court is at Whitehall, and it's cold, and the Thames is the colour of pewter through the window, and the garden is bare, the king comes to her apartments alone. This happens occasionally, less often now than it did at first, the nature of things having settled into something more complex and various, but it happens. He sits in the chair by the window, her chair, the one she writes at, but she's given it to him because that's what you do. And he has his dogs with him, 2 spaniels who arrange themselves around his feet with the complete relaxed certainty of animals who know exactly where they belong. He looks tired. The war aftermath has been drawn through everything. Parliament's in session next week, he says. I know. They're going to be difficult. They usually are. He's quiet for a moment. One of the spaniels puts its head on his foot. His hand drops down to touch its ear. Absent. Automatic. You've been useful to Arlington, he says. He told me last week. Not in so many words, but he told me. I've tried to be. The French Channel. He glances at her. When this is over, the war, the treaty fallout, whatever Parliament decides to be furious about this season, I want to formalise some things. She's careful not to say too much. In what sense? Something that doesn't depend entirely on my favour, he says. Something structural. She's quiet the way she's learned to be quiet when something important is happening. Let it unfold. Don't grab. What you've built, he says, and she hears something in his voice that isn't quite king, isn't quite patron, is something more particular. It's yours. You built it. I want to make sure, he pauses, that it stays yours. She looks at him across the room. He looks back. Outside, the Thames moves in its grey winter way. The spaniels breathe softly around his feet. Thank you, she says. He nods. Once. Then he looks back out the window, and the conversation moves to other things. The war, Parliament, a book he's been reading about navigation that's made him want to go back to the laboratory, and the afternoon settles around them both quiet and ordinary. 2 people in a cold room in February with dogs at their feet. Not forever, never forever, in this game, but right now, this specific afternoon, that's something. These seasons turn. Winter to spring and the crocus again, the fountain restarted, the smell of green coming through the window. Spring to summer, the move to Windsor, the long evenings in the park, the deer and the elm avenue and the view from the terrace that still takes your breath away. Summer to autumn, the light changing, the chestnuts falling, the court's mood shifting with the year. Autumn to winter, the candles multiplying, the fires burning, the shortest days. And again. Eleanor Ashworth has been at Whitehall for 4 years, for 5, for 6. She has seen things she couldn't have imagined at 19. She has done things she couldn't have explained to the person she was before. The French correspondence has become something that 3 different offices in the English government now depend on, when it almost collapsed twice, once through a personnel change in Montespan's circle, once through a breach that required a careful 18 months of rebuilding. She was the one who held it together. She doesn't have a title. She has Arlington's trust, which is worth more in practical terms than many titles. She has the king's genuine regard, which is complicated and real and not a thing you can take to a lawyer. She has The knowledge of how this court works at a level of detail that took 6 years to accumulate, and that would take another 6 to replace. She has the floor she built. This is where I want to leave you tonight. Not with a dramatic conclusion. There isn't one, not yet. Not in 1674 or 1675 or however far we've come. The story doesn't end neatly. Stories like this don't. Eleanor Ashworth will be at Whitehall for another decade, through the final years of Charles II's reign. She will watch the political crisis of the exclusion crisis reshape the court around her. She will watch Louise de Querouaille navigate the storm of anti-Catholic sentiment with the skill of someone who has spent years learning that court. She will watch Barbara Villiers' star complete its long arc. She will be there, in the corridor or the room, or the position in the web of relationships holding what she built. When Charles II dies in 1685 from a stroke that comes without much warning at the age of 54, the court changes overnight. James II is Catholic and his priorities are entirely different. The position that Eleanor has occupied, the particular web of connection and utility, becomes suddenly precarious. But she's had 11 years to build, and the floor, the actual documented floor, the annuity, the formal correspondence appointment, the connections that run through 3 different government offices, holds. She lives into the reign of William and Mary. She's in her 30s by then. She's not the girl who came from Kent with nothing. What she is harder to name. Survivor, certainly. Practitioner of a craft that has no formal name. Someone who built something real out of materials the world told her were insufficient. Someone who understood, young, that power without a title is still power. That proximity carefully built is real. That the web of relationships maintained over years is a structure as solid as any stone. Not a title, but hers. And here you are, not in a stone palace. Not in a corridor smelling of beeswax and river and the accumulated history of other people's ambitions. Here, wherever here is for you tonight. A bed, probably. A pillow that knows the shape of your head. The sounds of wherever you are, traffic or wind, or the breathing of someone else in the room, or nothing. Just the particular silence of your life at this hour. You've been somewhere tonight. You've walked the corridors of Whitehall in the winter morning. You've sat with the smell of chocolate and cold stone and February wind coming under the doors. You've read the careful calculations in a face across a room and learned to make your own face give nothing away that you haven't decided to give. You've stood on a terrace at Windsor and seen the Thames curling toward London in the summer light. You've felt the weight of a position built without legal foundation and held anyway, by intelligence and work and the kind of patience that only comes when you understand that you're building something and the building takes time. 350 years separate you from Eleanor Ashworth. The palace is gone. Most of Whitehall burned in 1698. Just fire and the particular carelessness of a palace that kept too many candles, and the specific court she navigated is beyond living memory. But something doesn't change. The weight of building something real out of materials you weren't officially supposed to have. The specific necessary courage of a person who looked at the structure of the world they were born into, calculated what was available, and decided to build anyway. That doesn't change. The human mind working out how to make something from what's given. The human heart doing the work of remaining open in a context that rewards calculation. Those don't change. You've walked with Eleanor Ashworth tonight. You felt the cold stone under her feet and the stiff boning of her stays and the scratch of the quill on French correspondence and a particular emotional texture of watching a king look at you like a specific person and not just a piece in a game. Let it settle now. Let the cold corridors grow warm and quiet. Let the candle sputter and go out. Your eyes are heavy. This is the thing that always happens, eventually, to the body that has been carrying you through the day. It stops cooperating with the part of you that wants to keep thinking, keep planning, keep working out the next move. It simply says, enough, rest now, and you can resist it for a while. Another thought, another calculation, another thing to remember for tomorrow. The body waits, but eventually the body wins. It always does. So let it. Let the specific plans of tomorrow dissolve for now. They'll still be there. The court doesn't disappear when you sleep. The correspondence will be on the table in the morning. The negotiations will wait. But for now, just this. Warm enough, safe enough, tired enough. The sounds of wherever you are, settling into night sounds. The thoughts slowing, the way thoughts do when sleep is taking them. Less sharp, less directed, softer at the edges. Centuries have passed since Eleanor Ashworth lay in her attic room in Kent, imagining a future she couldn't quite picture. Centuries since she lay in a palace room with the Thames below her window, and the weight of a position she'd built one careful step at a time. Those rooms are gone. The palace is ash and foundation stone. But you've been there tonight. You've felt the weight of the coverlet and the smell of the river and the cold stone of windowsills under palms. And now you can let it go. Let the palace dissolve. Let the court quiet. Let the century fold away. You're just here now, warm and breathing and done with the day. The days you're done with stay done. Tomorrow is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, there's just the long, slow settling of sleep reaching up to find you. Let it. You've earned this rest. All of it. The thinking, the navigating, the careful work of being alive and complicated and human in a world that doesn't always make space for it. It counts. It all counts. And now you can put it down. The last sound you hear is something quiet. Wind, maybe. Or water. Or just the breath of the building around you settling into night. And then just dark. Just rest. Just the long, deep drift downward. You're warm enough, held enough, still enough. Let the century sleep. Let Eleanor sleep. Let yourself sleep. Good night.